So the biggest enduring barriers for CAM that we've seen are twofold. One is getting senior leadership's attention and funding. And the second one is getting people to participate and advocate the knowledge management approaches that can be used. And Pat, I'll have to help you with the funding and stuff and resources later. But I'm going to deal with the second one because I think it's probably more relevant to this group. So in our session earlier, there were several people who said knowledge is power. So my interpretation of that is you still are dealing with the fact that people hoard knowledge. Is that pretty correct from our audience sitting here? So here's a challenge for you. Think about this. What we have found to be is quite contradictory to that. People are really not hoarding their knowledge. What they hoard is actually a more precious commodity, and that is their time. And people don't want to spend time doing something or having to come out of their workflow to go participate in something that is in the name of knowledge management or collaboration, because it takes them out of the flow, but it actually takes them more time. And so you may think that they're hoarding what they know, but it's just because they just don't have the time in the workflow. So again, work in the flow. Find the problems, find the issues that people are dealing with. Knowledge is not a thing, it's a flow, as FQC views it. And figure out how to help those people let their knowledge flow so that they can. If you're dealing with, in the question earlier, we were saying where can knowledge management help in a constrained environment. So define the value that you bring in terms of the business. If you're dealing in that constrained environment, one of your challenges is probably to get people's competencies up more quickly. So time to competency becomes a very important thing. So look at that through your knowledge lens and say, how do we help people do that? How do we actually, understand, how do we get people connected to experts? And as I shared earlier in our earlier session, Flora and ConocoPhillips, if you want to get the best practices as someone junior coming in reservoir engineering or drilling or construction, you go to the community to get access to that knowledge, and it builds that, it lessens the time to competency, is what we're seeing through their measures.
Thank you. Move on to number 5, please. So given what we've said, this is kind of a summation, and essentially what we're asking the panel members, how do you make a successful business case? I'll use the term loosely. What is the real why of knowledge management? We're going to start off with Dr. Tankowski.
I may be repeating myself here, but again, in any business you want to be successful, and so if you're going to be successful, obviously you have to know what you're about, your objectives. I am a systems person, and I believe in input, process, and output. It's always been my framework, and the first question you normally ask is what are your objectives? Is it to be the #1 car maker, to be the #1 killer in the world, to be the #1 university? And then you say, what do I need to get there? What are my inputs to get there? And the inputs come in a lot of physical and intangible areas. And in the intangible area, knowledge is, of course, the dominant one. So if you want to be successful, first of all, you have to have your outputs and articulated in measurable terms. I go into a lot of executives and even military people, and I was one myself. And sometimes you ask, well, what are you about? I mean, you get all this activity, I have no clue. Or if I do, I can't phrase it very well. And if I can phrase it well, I can't measure it. How do I expect an organization that has hundreds of thousands of people to follow me if I don't even know what I'm doing? So it's incumbent upon the top to make sure they have their objectives solidified in short, concise, and measurable terms. And then on the input side, what inputs do I need to get there? The critical ones. Don't get all of these red herrings. In our day and age, we're so easily distracted. That's why I like to look at critical assets, because if you look at the critical, everything else will take care of itself. If you miss it, you get on the right. And then, when you do it, then how do I best leverage them? By managing them, my processes, my organizational structure, my technology, my organizational behavior, all of the other stuff that we often say, well, it's not about technology, it's only about, they all fit together. It's a holistic approach. So if you want to be successful, know what you're doing in measurable terms. communicate it to all levels of the organization, and they have a different way of framing that objective. If I want to be #1 automaker, at the operational level, I got to build 1 million cars. At the tire division, I got to put 8 million tires on. What knowledge do I need at every level? It has to be an audit trail. And then again, inventory and name your knowledge and value it, because if you don't value it, you will lose your valuable knowledge. They move around today. Don't forget, knowledge is an infinite resource. It's mobile. But it's a lot of money. I mean, I go to Russia and you can't believe how much they pay me. Sometimes they give it away like here, you know. So it's my wealth. And then the processes, are so critical. And the process is not just the flow, it's the structure, it's the technology, it's all the things that harmonize with it. If you're only focusing on one thing, you're out to lunch again. So you gotta be successful. You gotta have a holistic systems approach, as we would define it, with all of these in mind. With knowledge, it's intangible that we can't see, but it's so critical to us as your key asset. That's my experience over 7 decades of what it needs to be successful.
Dr. Kirsch?
I think that a big part of what we have to do to make a successful business case is to move forward a little bit. I think everybody in here is familiar with Dilbert cartoons. I saw them, I think it was last week, that really struck home with me. I'm going to use this at least once in a sentence every day. One of the engineers was walking up to Dilbert and said something about when you're done with your grandpa box. Everybody's familiar with this? Not yet? I'm talking about, you know, the computers at the desk. Grandpa box for the generation that are out there now looking at tablets and things like that. So when you're done with your grandpa box, those of us who are using tablets and smartphones and that are now going to interface with you. And that's, I think, one of the big problems when we try to make business cases out there in the CAM world lately, probably for quite some while. We've been using grandpa box methodologies. We're in a knowledge age, so we should be talking about what value-added knowledge brings to the equation. So really, it all kind of comes down to what organizational gaps are you trying to close? What's your strategic big picture? What's that actual goal? We're talking strategic plans, outcome-based performance measurement. Yet often when people are trying to implement knowledge management, they don't really have a good strategic plan and they almost never look at outcome measures. So it's kind of hard to be able to determine what value added you bring to the table if you're not actually looking at what you would be bringing value added to. So I think that's one of the big issues. One of the things that I think that is probably important, and not just directly answering that question, but indirectly answering it, is to talk about how not to make a good business case. I think one of the worst business cases examples that we've had inside of your world has been when folks have gone out there with the CAM gets no budget, so just start doing it now and try to prove the value of CAM. So what do? We go chase those low-hanging fruits and quick wins. How's that working for you? Anybody had their quick wins funded lately? Anybody meet the low-hanging fruit resource evaluation board? Said if anybody's got any low-hanging fruit we want to get funded this quarter, let's fund that. Yeah, me neither. So I think when you try to make the case for knowledge management from that business case perspective, we've got to get away from that kind of grandpa box mentality. We've got to be thinking about knowledge value added. That's the big one. ROI is that grandpa box metric. Return on investment. We think about knowledge as Mike has suggested as a strategic asset. It's not a question of investing in it. We have it. It's how do we utilize it. So looking at building a business case for how that knowledge will be utilized and to improve the organization is what it's all about. But please don't go out there and start asking for resources for low-hanging fruits and quick wins. Just not going to work. Again, anyone ever been funded for those? And I'll show of hands. Me neither. Thanks.
Ms. Hubert?
I'm going to build on Dan a little bit. So, look, I think you got to think about this as an art and science. So knowledge management has become a science. We can put in, we know the inputs, the investments, the FTEs required, 4 to 20, whatever you need. You can look at the key activities and those that need to be facilitated. You can look at the tools and systems, and you can put a dollar figure on there and what it's going to take. The art then is, and you're going to have to measure like heck to show what the return is. So the art becomes the knowledge component. And I'm going to go back to speaking in terms of what your organization, how the business defines value. Last year I had an advanced working group around knowledge management, focused on a number of different topics, but one was about being agile. and being able to respond to the needs of the business. And we got very raptured by the Chilean miner incident. And if you look at that as a model, as KM as first responder, you know, they brought in, there was a crisis, and they brought in, with the outcome, life. And they brought in the best knowledge they could. I mean, all the way from construction companies, engineering, right, as you want to call them here, NASA you may have been. But anyways, when you look at they brought knowledge to bear on those problems. You as a knowledge leader, knowledge management leader, have to be there ready to respond to your organization's knowledge needs. Whether it's in crisis, whether it's through innovation, whether it's through time to competency and learning, that's where you want to be at the table as a first responder, so you can proactively respond to that. So the business case is what it is, and you have to have that to support those processes and tools and people that facilitate that and manage it. But then the knowledge piece becomes the larger effort that you've got to really understand the nature of your business and the nature of your knowledge.
Thank you. Mr. Warren, this is a recorded event, so I do want to go on record as you're changing your number to 20. You're up there.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, but how do you make the successful business case? You know, it is knowledge is a strategic resource, and the way we have adopted our knowledge network and are trying to implement change across our organization to take full advantage of it. Just the anecdotes and the few that I've mentioned here help sell that to senior leaders that then can sign the checks. And a lot of senior leaders really get it. I know Joel Dempsey gets it now. I know Joel Cohn gets it as our TRADOC commander. They also understand that the organizational lines are a bit blurred when you look at knowledge networks and how they work. They don't follow organizational constructs. We were pretty naive when we first set it up that the knowledge, those needing knowledge would be the ones downrange, and those providing it would be the folks like us over here in the States in our little ivory towers. And that's not how this thing works at all. I mean, many times it's us that need knowledge from them to try to help make decisions to improve their operations. And just as a silly little example, I had a 3-star general ask me, hey, you know, we're shipping all these tires, we're in the logistics business, and we're shipping all these tires into Iraq and Afghanistan. What are we doing with the old tires? And I was like, you know, as a logistician, I should know the answer to that. And I didn't, and I was a little embarrassed about that. Now, I could have put the staff on a 2-week study to get that answer. But I turned to Pat and I said, hey, put that out on SKN and let's see what we get. And literally within 2 hours, I was talking to the DLA. It's a Defense Logistics Agency mission. They were setting up Iraqi companies that were recycling these tires in Iraq and about to do the same thing in Afghanistan. And they were so they were helping the economy. They were getting rid of the tires, which was a great log solution. And I was able to go back to that 3-star general before the end of the day with the right answer and the guy in charge, and all through the SKN. And I've used that example a couple of times of how you can shape that power and leverage it. To me, first let me tell you what Joe Odierno said recently about knowledge management as he left GEFCON to head to be the chief. Knowledge management is not a niche capability. It is a core function as we move forward in redefining operations in the military art, and I truly believe that. And it's not just operations, but it's how we support the operations over in the generating force side of the Army. For me at CASCOM, it's knowledge management is about enabling the right amount of knowledge at the right place at right time to achieve a purpose, which is what management's all about. We're trying to achieve a purpose, and we're trying to do it with the knowledge that we can garner and leverage at that time. So I think there's a great business case, and I think we've made it pretty well, and we'll continue to make it, at least within our little fiefdom. And just want to continue to spread the wealth, so to speak, to improve all aspects of the Army.
Thanks, sir. We're going to go on to the next chart. We're running a little short on time here, so we'll entertain 3 questions. 1 minute dialogue. If anybody has a question here for the panel. If not, we're going to move on to the next phase. I do want to iterate to the virtual audience as well as everybody here. These sessions are recorded. both the presentations as well as the online versions thereof. That email address is where you can send a request whereby we'll tell you where the recordings will be subsequently posted. It is also the email address to access, if you're interested in where we're carrying this next, which is a virtual environment where these types of discussions will continue on. And if you have questions relative to the panel that we didn't get to talk to today, that's where you go to find out where the dialogue will take place in a discussion forum or such. We're going to move on to the final summations here. We're going to give each panel member, starting from your left to right, to kind of state, did they get what they wanted to out of this panel? And so we'll start with you, Mr. Moore. Go ahead to the next turn.
Yeah, I certainly did. I've actually learned a lot because, like I said at the beginning, I'm just a user. These folks are the suppliers of the expertise. They live and breathe this knowledge management thing, and it's just so powerful. And I've got some notes of things I want to discuss with Pat, and probably adjust fire on a few of the ways we do business at CASCOM anyway, and how we utilize knowledge management. So yeah, it's a great session. Thank you, Pat.
Cindy?
Pat, yes. Well, of course. Who could not, sitting here with this panel? I think, Bill, I was looking for some real-world experiences, and you'll get a phone call followed up because you guys are living in this real world. And when he talks about, hey, we put a plea out and got this kind of response, Mike said, it's not just about sharing, but it's how you apply it and what happens after you apply it. And when it gets applied, people who do it just go on. You got your problem solved, you can move on to the next thing. And I think coming back to where I sit in this world in terms of how is it being used and what's the value of that, we're the ones, it's incumbent on us to go after it and say, what was the value? So it can be told again and again around the campfire like we used to. Thank you, Matt.
Well, for me, it's always great to get out of Washington in my ivory tower and see what the real people are doing. So I'm always honored to be amongst you and to learn too, because I think the value of my being in academia is I'm learning more than I'm giving, which is humbling. And I always pick up new stuff, so thanks a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that leads it to me. I think what I've gained the most from being in this panel today is my wife thinks that I've tried to escape an earthquake and possibly a hurricane. So this is sort of an evasion technique that apparently I'm developing using knowledge management, she thinks. No, I guess probably the big thing is what I've talked with a lot of you in the audience about before, is that I think that it's interesting to see the diverging backgrounds, yet some of the commonality, and we pinged on a lot of the same issues. I think that it's also kind of important to see that coming from 4 different perspectives, we've identified these issues as long-standing issues too. So I think that's kind of your throwback. To know what lessons you've learned from this, I think would be kind of important for us and both for you. So that's what I got out of it. Thanks a lot.
So for closing comments, just want to make a note. I'll be fired by, or excuse me, fired. Probably fired too, but followed by our brother-in-arms, Mr. Grados, and the great team at Fires. If you really want to see something in action that relates to what's going on, I would suggest you just stay in your seat and take a quick break and watch what's going on. And with that said, I'd like to just thank the panel